addressed the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly at the UN headquarters in New York, United States, on the 26th of September 2018. Egypt participated in the inception of the organization 7 decades ago, and throughout the 6 terms during which Egypt served on the UN Security Council, the latest of which was in 2016-2017. The President first of all appreciated the role played by the United Nations in settling regional and international issues. The President also highlighted the Egyptian vision towards the United Nations with a solid belief in the values and role of the United Nations. The President said that, in all frankness, we have to admit that there is a flaw in the international system which negatively affects its performance and casts a shadow over its credibility in the eyes of many people, particularly in the Arab and African regions wherein Egypt lies. He said that developing countries can ill afford to exist in an international order which is not governed by laws. There is no doubt that the Arab region is one of the most vulnerable to the dangers of nation-state disintegration. The President added that there can be no way out of the crisis in Syria and Yemen except by restoring the nation-state, preserving its sovereignty and government institutions. Expressing support for the United Nations-led political solution in those 2 countries, he said the same principles applies to the policy in Libya, where Egypt plays a pivotal role in support of rebuilding the state. A year has passed since the adoption of the United Nations Action Plan on Libya, and despite the commendable efforts of the organization in numerous conflicts, including South Sudan, the Central African Republic and Mali, many have fallen short of finding permanent settlements to such disputes. The President stressed that one cannot talk about the peaceful settlement of disputes without citing the Palestinian cause, the situation that is a perfect example of the failure of the international system to find a just solution to such crises. Pledging commitment to sustainable development, the President emphasized the critical need to tackle the financing for development conundrum that can be achieved through the creation of an enabling environment which allows for the free flow of resources necessary for development without imposing any conditionalities. He also welcomed the United Nations serving as a platform for developing ideas to achieve this reform. The President stressed the importance of strengthening partnerships between the United Nations and regional organizations to meet the rising challenges the international community faces at the political, economic, and developmental levels. As Egypt leads the presidency of the African Union in 2019, the President added that the Egyptian government is looking forward to strengthening the strategic partnership between the Union and the United Nations. Egypt plans to implement the initiative launched during its membership of the United Nations Security Council, focused on boosting cooperation to counter terrorism and the terrorist narrative. Egypt needs to also address the major shortcomings in the international community's handling of human rights issues. The President said that the protection of human rights will not be realized through media defamation or the politicization of human rights mechanisms, while ignoring the need to tackle all human rights in an equitable manner, including economic, social, and cultural rights on equal footing. He stressed that Egypt has a solid constitutional foundation for the protection of human rights. Major strides have been achieved in the field of women and youth empowerment. Women now hold 25% of the ministerial posts and more than 15% of the seats in parliament. Also, international youth conferences that are held annually in Egypt in November have become a regular forum for the youth to communicate. Egypt is determined to continue to afford high priority to the issues of women economic empowerment and the causes of the youth, science, technology, and innovation during Egypt's presidency of the Group of 77 and China, as a practical example of commitment to the promotion of human rights in a comprehensive manner. Egypt, like the vast majority of the world's peoples and nations, has interest in restoring the credibility of the multilateral system with the United Nations at its forefront. Egypt believed that the organization can overcome skepticism over its merits and credibility by restoring the lofty principles upon which its charter was premised and acting according to the priority addressed, which reflect the aspirations of our peoples. The President stressed that only through united actions the organization will reclaim its credibility and world peoples will regain their confidence in a future of peace, cooperation and respect of one another. The President highlighted the Egypt's Vision 2030 project and how it is compatible with the UN's third pillar, which addresses development, calling the UN to support visions on which states can acquire better quality of life for their people.
President Abdel Fattah El Sisi met on Monday with the Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel on the sidelines of his participation in the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York. Presidential spokesperson Ambassador Bassam Radi said that during the meeting, President El Sisi congratulated the Belgian Premier for being elected as the European Council President following Donald Tusk. The President stressed Egypt's keenness to foster relations with Belgium in various domains and asserted that Egypt seeks to boost joint cooperation on the economic, trade, cultural and tourism levels. For his part, Michel praised distinguished ties between the two countries and pointed out to the special status of Egypt in the European Union.
And since then, some of those currents continue to move in promising directions. Against the expectations of many, elections unfolded peacefully in Madagascar, the Maldives, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to name just a few. Greece and the Republic of North Macedonia resolved their decades-long name dispute. Political dialogue in Sudan and the peace process in the Central African Republic have brought renewed hope. And the long-sought step forward has just been taken on the political path out of the tragedy in Syria and in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. As I announced yesterday, an agreement has been reached with all parties for a credible, balanced and inclusive Syrian-owned and Syrian-led constitutional committee. My special envoy just left Damascus after finalizing the last details with the government and the opposition. And the United Nations look forward to convening the committee in Geneva in the coming weeks. But Excellencies, across the global landscape, we see conflicts persisting, terrorism spreading, and the risk of a new arms race growing. Outside interferences, often in violation of Security Council resolutions, make peace processes more difficult. And so many situations remain unresolved, from Yemen to Libya to Afghanistan and beyond. A succession of unilateral actions threatens to torpedo a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. And in Venezuela, 4 million people have fled the country, one of the largest displacements in the world. Tensions are elevated in South Asia, where differences need to be addressed through dialogue. And above all, we are facing the alarming possibility of armed conflict in the Gulf, the consequences of which the world cannot afford. The recent attack on Saudi Arabia oil facilities was totally unacceptable. In a context where a minor miscalculation can lead to a major confrontation, we must do everything possible to push for reason and restraint. And I hope for a future in which all the countries of the region can live in a state of mutual respect and cooperation without interference in each other's affairs. And I hope equally that it will still be possible to preserve the progress on nuclear non-proliferation represented by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Excellencies, from day one, I have emphasized prevention, mediation, and a surge in diplomacy for peace to address the crises we face. Consider the lives we can save by intensifying our investments to sustain peace around the world. Across some of the most troubled corners of the world, some 100,000 UN peacekeepers protect civilians and promote peace. And through the Action for Peacekeeping initiative, we are strengthening our effectiveness and efficiency, and we are renewing partnerships with troop and police contributing countries, host countries, and regional organizations such as the African Union and the European Union. And I'm also proud of the work of our humanitarians easing suffering around the world. Fully half of all international relief aid is channeled through the United Nations, ensuring that millions receive protection, food, medicine, shelter, water, and other life-saving forms of assistance. This year alone, in brutal attacks and other circumstances, we have lost at least 80 peacekeepers, humanitarians, and others, all of whom gave their lives serving the United Nations and trying to better the lives of others. I honor their service and their sacrifice. Excellencies, we have bolstered our counterterrorism architecture and defined new strategies to tackle violent extremism and address root causes while respecting human rights. And I have put forward a new disarmament agenda to advance global peace. In the near term, the New START agreement must be extended. We must work to address the heightened threat posed by ballistic missiles and ensure a successful 2020 review of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The situation of the Korean Peninsula remains uncertain, and I fully support the efforts towards a new summit between the President of the United States and the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And at this time of transition and dysfunction in global power relations, there is a new risk looming on the horizon that may not yet be large, but it is real. I fear the possibility of a great fracture, the world splitting in two, with the two largest economies on Earth creating two separate and competing worlds, which with their own dominant currency, trade and financial rules, their own internet and artificial intelligence capacities, and their own zero-sum geopolitical and military strategies. We must do everything possible to avert the great fracture and maintain a universal system, a universal economy with universal respect for international law, a multipolar world with strong multilateral institutions. Excellencies, people have a right to security in all its dimensions. Every measure to uphold human rights helps deliver sustainable development and peace. In the 21st century, we must see human rights with a vision that speaks to each and every human being and encompasses all rights: economic, social, cultural, political, and civil. It would be a mistake to ignore or diminish economic, social, and cultural rights. But it would be equally misguided to think that those rights are enough to answer people's yearnings for freedom. Human rights are universal and indivisible. One cannot pick and choose, favoring some while disdaining others. People have a right to well-being and dignified standards of life, with health, housing, and food, social protection, and a sustainable environment. Education, not only to learn things, but to learn how to learn and prepare to the future. And decent jobs, especially for young people. These rights permeate the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and they are among our best tools for preventing conflict. Yet, we are not on track. Inequality is exploding. Our global economy generates great flows of income, but this prosperity is captured by a small number of elites. It is a sad fact of our world today that one's chances of leading a life free of want and in full human dignity still depend more on the circumstances of one's birth than one's innate capacities. Today's Sustainable Development Goals Summit and the Thursday's dialogue on financing are opportunities to ramp up ambition, including by utilizing the promise of technology and innovation as recommended by the high-level panel on digital cooperation that has concluded its report. Excellencies, as was emphasized in yesterday's Climate Action Summit, the climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it is a race we can win if we change our ways now. Even our language has to adapt. What once was called climate change is now truly a climate crisis. And what was once called global warming has more accurately become global heating. We are seeing unprecedented temperatures, unrelenting storms, and undeniable science. 10 days ago, in the Bahamas, I saw the ruin caused by Hurricane Dorian. That aftermath is a mere prelude to what science tells us is on its way. But something else is on its way, solutions. And the world is starting to move, not yet fast enough, but move in the right direction, away from fossil fuels and towards the opportunities of a green economy. And the Climate Summit highlighted some of the solutions we need to scale up in order to dramatically reduce emissions, keep temperatures rise to 1.5 degrees, and reach carbon neutrality by 2050. But we are not yet there. We must build on this momentum and do much more to be able to defeat climate change. Excellences.
Excellencies, people have a right to the fundamental freedoms that every country has promised to uphold. Yet, we today are at a critical juncture where advances made across decades are threatened, reversed, or undermined. We see wide-ranging impunity, including impunity for violations of international humanitarian law. We also see new forms of authoritarianism appearing, and the civic space is narrowing and citizens' voices are being stifled. Human rights advocates, environmental activists, and journalists are being targeted. Day after day, click by click, camera by camera, surveillance systems are expanding their reach and encroaching on our privacy. But these breaches go beyond the breakdown in rules governing the behavior of states and businesses. They are playing out on a deeper level. They bring into question our very compassion and our humanity. At a time when record numbers of refugees and internally displaced people are on the move, solidarity is on the run. We see borders, but also hearts closing and whole societies become hostile to foreigners. We can see refugees' families torn apart and the right to seek asylum flouted. We must restore the integrity of the international refugee protection regime and fulfill the promises of responsibility sharing set out in the Global Compact on Refugees. We must also build on the landmark adoption of the first ever Global Compact on Migration last December. And we have to strengthen international cooperation for orderly and regular migration and counter the smugglers and criminals who enrich themselves on the backs of vulnerable people. All migrants must see their human rights respected. Excellencies, around the world today, fear, sadly, is gaining ground. Isolation and mistrust are being used for political purposes, and that is why I launched 2 initiatives. The first one is a UN system-wide strategy to tackle hate speech. And the second one is an action plan to support efforts to safeguard religious sites and to uphold the right to religious freedom. Any minority, religious, ethnic, or other, must fully enjoy their basic rights. Social cohesion is rarely easy to obtain. Strong investments need to ensure that diverse community feels that their identities are respected and that they have a stake in the society as a whole. To those who insist on oppression or division, I say diversity is not a threat, it's a richness. It is unacceptable in the 21st century for women and men to be persecuted because of their identity, belief, or sexual orientation. We, of course, must also secure the rights of vulnerable and marginalized people. This year, I launched the first United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy. And, of course, we mustn't forget the world's most pervasive manifestation of discrimination, which affects fully half of humankind, discrimination against women and girls. Gender equality is a question of power, and power still essentially lies with men. And we can see that anywhere from parliaments to boardrooms, and even, we must say, this week in the halls and corridors and meeting rooms of the United Nations. We must break with the rigidity of the past and truly see women's rights and representations as our common goal for the humanity as a whole. And I am working on this with the United Nations. Every day we're working to ensure gender parity as well as regional balance. Today, we have achieved parity in my senior management group and amongst the resident coordinators, that is, amongst those people who lead United Nations work at the country level.
Excellencies, I will not let up until we have reached gender parity at all levels at the United Nations and full equality for women and girls around the world. That means continuing to push back against the pushback against women's rights. It also means calling out a troubling commonality in terrorist attacks, extremist ideologies, and brutal crimes, the violent misogyny of the perpetrators. And it means stepping up our efforts to expand opportunity. At present trends, it will take 2 centuries to close the gap in economic empowerment. We cannot accept a world that tells my granddaughters that equality must wait for their granddaughters'
Excellencies, as we continue all this vital work and more, I've launched ambitious reforms to make the United Nations more effective. I count on you to place our organization on sound financial footing. In an ever more divided world, we need a strong United Nations. Next year, we will mark the 75th anniversary of the UN, a critical moment to renew our common project. The problems we face are real, but so is hope. As we strive to serve people, we also can be inspired by people. Over the past 2.5 years, I've spent time with young African girls learning to code, with teachers equipping young people with new skills for the future, with entrepreneurs in many fields leading the world innovation by innovation into the green economy. They and so many others are helping to build the future we want. Their aspirations and their human rights must always be our touchstone. We are here to serve. We are here to advance the common good while upholding our shared humanity and values. That vision united the founders of our organization. At a time of division today, we must reconnect with that spirit. Let us restore trust, rebuild hope, and move ahead together. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his presentation. The General Assembly will now turn to Agenda Item 8, entitled General Debate. Heads of State and Government, Secretary General, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all to the general debate of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your presence is a veritable testament to the primacy of this great multilateral body. The issues herein raised are most critical and increasingly urgent for the attainment of international peace and security, as well as the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. We have remained for too long at the crossroads of human development. And if we will propel humanity to attain its utmost capacity, then we need to join efforts in finding solutions to the untold hardship from violent conflicts, terrorism, natural disasters, drug and sex trafficking, illiteracy, and so on, which millions of people around the world suffer from. In 1945, rising from the ashes of the Second World War, this organization was created to ensure that never again will we traverse that destructive path. Despite occasional failings on our part, much good has happened to humanity because of this great organization. Excellencies, our most recent achievement is the adoption of the transformative and ambitious 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015. The implementation of the SDGs by 2030 must be a priority in the interest of the billions of people who may never step inside this great hall, but who hope that the work undertaken here will galvanize efforts for poverty eradication, zero hunger, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. Achieving our targets under the SDGs requires cooperation in both financing and the sharing of experience. Without doubt, the challenges posed by health pandemics, terrorism, displacement, climate change, as well as illiteracy and poverty will not be resolved by individual countries, as they all require focused cooperation to stem. As President of the 74th session, I'll work with all delegations and with the other organs of the United Nations to advance the implementation of the priorities which I have set out for the 74th session of the Assembly. The promotion of international peace and security is at the heart of the work of the United Nations. We must continue to strengthen the organization by ensuring that its peace and security architecture is appropriate for the 21st century, particularly making a priority of prevention. Drivers of conflict, such as poverty, inequality, human rights abuses, lack of access to education, and employment opportunities must be tackled head-on. Through proper sharing of ideas and functional partnerships, we can address them successfully. Excellencies, poverty eradication remains a great challenge globally. While many countries around the world have succeeded in taking millions out of poverty, we have to do more to take hundreds of millions more out of abject poverty, misery, and squalid existence. Accordingly, I urge you to reflect specifically on how your countries can, among other things, ensure improved social protection systems and channel a significant proportion of government spending to hitherto marginalized or excluded groups who are most affected by poverty. In addition, countries need to cooperate on the development of entrepreneurial capacity and in the modernization of agriculture. The fact that poverty and food shortages around the world have been exacerbated by climate change means that special focus must be placed on tackling climate change, as the repercussions of not acting pose grave dangers for our world now and in the future. These dangers are evident in the financial and human impact that climate change-related disasters like floods, cyclones, hurricanes, droughts, and wildfires cause around the world. We need to deploy the knowledge, and technologies available to us to ensure that we do not condemn our children to an irreparable world. I call for cooperation among nations to ensure that coalitions for climate resilience and mitigation actions are formed and strengthened. Accordingly, we should deliver on our commitments made in Paris in 2015 and devise creative ways of bridging the huge financial and technical gaps required for meaningful impact. Ensuring access to free and quality primary and secondary education, as well as affordable and inclusive vocational and technical education, is vital. This is imperative, given the reality that no nation can develop beyond its educational capacity, particularly the capacity of its teachers. In this regard, there is an immediate need, among others, to ensure that students around the world are taught by qualified teachers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as in the humanities. I urge countries endowed and better placed to deepen cooperation with those currently in greater need for capacity development of their teachers. In addition, there is need to reflect on the gains that have been made and opportunities that are available to the girl child and disabled children. Ensuring inclusion, particularly as it relates to the rights and empowerment of youth, women, and the disabled, is the right thing to do. It is also a guarantor of the expansion of the economy and the accentuation of inclusion in all countries. While many countries have made considerable advancement in this aspect, all countries have ample room for improvement in this direction. Clearly, Excellencies, effectively implementing the aforementioned will require that we never relapse into the bitter rivalries of the past, while prioritizing cooperation, mutual interest, and respect. We must pool our resources and energies and try harder to urgently address major global challenges in humanity. Accordingly, it is important that we continue to strengthen South-South as well as triangular cooperation to reinforce the work of the United Nations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, evidence abounds that we can do great things if we are courageous, steadfast, and show empathy. From Mahatma Gandhi, who led a successful campaign for India's independence, to the young Greta Thunberg, who laid the demand for action on the climate, from Nelson Mandela, who stood resolutely and sought the dismantling of apartheid, to Malala Yousafzai, who, against all odds, insisted on her rights to education, from Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister and leader of the civil rights movement, to Abdullah Abdullahi, a Nigerian imam who saved the lives of over 250 Christians when they fled his community during an attack on a community in Nigeria, to the various acts of courage and generosity of ordinary people in all countries, we are reminded that hope is not lost. In conclusion, we should not forget the fact that we stand in this magnificent hall today in the presence of leaders from around the globe to debate how best to achieve the world of our collective dream is a remarkable feat in itself. I am certain that during the remainder of this event-packed week, we will see us all shuttling between the various halls and meeting rooms of our great organization. We will be giving focused attention to the suffering of billions of people around the world and crafting stronger cooperation that is essential to creating a world where, in concert and in line with the founding principles of this organization, will give succor and hope to all people and nations for a more peaceful and prosperous world. There is great work to be done. We have no room for either cynicism or apathy. We should strive together to deliver for all. I thank you. Before giving the floor to the first speaker for this morning, I would like to remind members that the list of speakers for the general debate has been established on the agreed basis that statements should be no longer than 15 minutes to enable all the speakers to be heard at a given meeting. Within this time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation in the other official United Nations languages may be provided properly. I would like to also draw your attention to the decision taken by the General Assembly at its previous sessions, namely that the practice of expressing congratulations inside the General Assembly hall after a speech has been delivered is strongly discouraged. In this connection, after delivering their statements, speakers are invited to exit the General Assembly hall through GA 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats. May I take it that the General Assembly agrees to proceed in the same manner during the general debate of the 74th session? It is so decided. Finally, I should like to draw the attention of members that during the general debate, official photographs of all speakers are taken by the Department of Global Communications. Members interested in obtaining these photographs are requested to contact the Photo Library of the United Nations. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency, Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. Assembly, I have the pleasure to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Jair Messias Bolsonaro, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
First of all, I thank God for being alive and for the mandate and mission of presiding over Brazil, and also for the opportunity to re-establish truth, which is, of course, a good thing to all of us. Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Tijani Mohamed Bande, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Antonio Guterres, heads of state, of government, and heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. I come here before you today to introduce you to a new Brazil, a country that is now re-emerging after coming from the brink of socialism, a country that is being rebuilt on the yearnings and ideals of its people. Under my administration, Brazil has been working to regain world trust and also to lower unemployment, violence, and business risks by reducing bureaucracy through deregulation, and especially by leading through example. My country was very close to socialism, which led us to a situation of widespread corruption, serious economic recession, high crime rates, and continuous, ceaseless attacks against family and religious values that are part and parcel of our traditions. In 2013, an agreement between the former Workers' Party and the Cuban dictatorship brought to Brazil 10,000 doctors who had no evidence of professional training. They were prevented from bringing their spouses or children, and 75% of their wages were confiscated by the Cuban regime, and they were further prevented from enjoying fundamental rights, such as, for example, the right to go and come. Truly tantamount to slave labor, believe me. Supported by human rights organizations, both in Brazil and the United Nations organization. Even before I took office, almost 90% of these Cuban citizens left Brazil as a result of a one-sided initiative by the Cuban government. Those who decided to stay in Brazil will undergo proper technical eligibility criteria to allow them to exercise the medical profession. Brazil has therefore stopped contributing to the Cuban dictatorship by no longer sending to Havana $300 million, as had been the case every year. History has taught us that already back in the 1960s, Cuban agents were sent out to several countries to collaborate towards implementing dictatorships in the region. A few decades ago, they tried to change the Brazilian regime and the system in place in other countries in Latin America. They were defeated. Brazilian civilians and military died, were killed, and so many had their reputation fully destroyed. We have nevertheless overcome that war, and we have upheld our freedom. In Venezuela, these agents of the Cuban regime introduced by Hugo Chavez also made their way into Venezuela. And today, there are 60,000 Cuban agents who control and interfere in all areas of the Venezuelan society, especially in intelligence and defense. Venezuela, formerly a vibrant democratic country, currently experiences the cruelty of socialism. It is fair to say that, yes, socialism is working in Venezuela. They're all poor and deprived of freedom. Brazil has also felt the impacts resulting from the Venezuelan dictatorship. Of the more than 4 million Venezuelan citizens who fled the country, a sizable portion migrated to Brazil, fleeing hunger and violence. We have done our part to help them and assist them through the Operation Welcome carried out by the Brazilian Army and praised worldwide. We have also worked with other countries, including the United States of America, to ensure that democracy will be established in Venezuela. We have also endeavored our very best efforts to ensure that other South American countries will not experience this harmful regime. The Sao Paulo Forum, a criminal organization created back in 1990 by Fidel Castro, Lula da Silva, and Hugo Chavez to disseminate and implement socialism in Latin America, remains alive and must be combated. Ladies and gentlemen, in the quest for prosperity, we have been putting in place policies that will bring us closer to other countries that have achieved development and consolidated their democracies. There can be no political freedom without economic freedom, and vice versa. A free market, concessions projects, and privatization opportunities are already a visible part of today's Brazil. The Brazilian economy is now responding as the distortions and chains of nearly 2 decades have been overcome. More than 2 decades of fiscal irresponsibility, manipulation, ideological manipulation of the state apparatus, and widespread corruption. Economic openness, capable government management, and productivity gains are immediate goals of our administration. We are opening up the economy, and we are integrating ourselves into the global value chains. In no more than 8 months, we have successfully completed the 2 most important and largest trade agreements in the history of my country. I'm talking about the recently signed agreements between the Mercosur bloc of countries in the European Union and also between Mercosur and the European Free Trade Area, the EFTA. We intend to go ahead and enter into more such agreements in the next few months. We also stand ready to start out our process of accession to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. We're well underway in that effort and have adopted the world's highest standards and best practices in all areas, ranging from financial regulation all the way up to environmental protection. Madam Indigenous Representative and Leader Izani Kalapalu, an indigenous spokesperson, is here, and we will now speak about the Amazon in particular. First of all, may I say that my administration has solemnly committed itself to environmental preservation and to sustainable development to the benefit of Brazil and of the world at large. Brazil is one of the world's richest countries in biodiversity and mineral resources. Our Amazonian region is larger than all of Western Europe and remains virtually pristine and untouched, which is evidence of the fact that we are one of the countries that most protect the environment. During this season of the year, the dry weather and winds are conducive and favor spontaneous forest fires and also criminal burnings. It should be highlighted that there are forest fires or burnings that are part of the ordinary practices of indigenous peoples and the local populations as part of their own culture and means of livelihood. We all know that all countries have problems, yet the sensationalist attacks that we have suffered coming from a large part of the international media due to the fire outbreaks in the Amazonian region have aroused our patriotic sentiment. It is a fallacy to say that the Amazon is the heritage of humankind, and a misconception as confirmed by scientists to say that our Amazonian forests are the lungs of the world. Using and resorting to these fallacies, certain countries, instead of helping, embarked on the media lies and behaved in a disrespectful manner and with a colonialist spirit. They even called into question that which we hold as the most sacred value, our sovereignty. One of these countries during a recent G7 meetings dared suggest applying sanctions to Brazil without even consulting with or hearing Brazil. I thank those countries that did not accept to go ahead with this absurd proposal. In particular, I thank President Donald Trump, who very aptly summarized the spirit that should prevail among United Nations member countries, i.e. respect for the freedom and the sovereignty of each of us as nations. Currently, 14% of the Brazilian territory are demarcated officially as indigenous lands, but one must understand that our natives are human beings, just as any one of us here. They want and they deserve to enjoy the same rights as all of us. I want to make it plain and clear, Brazil will not increase to 20% her area already demarcated officially as indigenous lands, as some heads of state would like to see. In Brazil, there are 225 different indigenous peoples, in addition to about 70 tribes living in isolated locations nationwide. Each indigenous people or tribe has their own chief, their own culture, their own traditions and customs, and above all, they have their own way of seeing the world. The view of one indigenous leader does not represent the views of all Brazilian indigenous peoples. Oftentimes, some of these leaders, such as tribal chief Raoni, have been used as maneuvering tools manipulated by government or foreign governments in their information war to advance their interests in the Amazon. Unfortunately, some people, both in and outside of Brazil, supported by NGOs, have stubbornly insisted on treating and keeping our Indians as if they were real cavemen. Brazil now has a president that is concerned with those who were there in our territory before the Portuguese arrived back in the 1500s. The indigenous people do not want to be poor, large landholders sitting on rich lands. They do not, especially sitting on the world's richest lands. That is precisely the case of the Yanomami Reserve and the Raposa Serra do Sol Reserve. These reserves are home to vast deposits of gold, diamond, uranium, niobium, and rare earths, among other resources. And these territories are huge. The Yanomami Reserve alone numbers approximately 95,000 square kilometers, an area equivalent to the size of Portugal or of Hungary, although only 15,000 indigenous people live in such a vast area. This goes to show clearly that those who attack us are not at all concerned about indigenous as human beings, but rather they're concerned more about the mineral riches and the biodiversity that exists in these areas. As evidence to you of the fact that there is no single authority among the indigenous peoples, I wish to read out to you a letter drafted and representing a substantial part of the indigenous communities in Brazil, addressed to you, the United Nations Assembly. Open letter to the indigenous peoples of Brazil. The group of indigenous farmers of Brazil, made up by several different ethnic groups and found in all states of the Brazilian Federation and inhabiting an area of more than 30 million hectares of the Brazilian territory, hereby respectfully addresses the Brazilian society to express its total and unconditional support to indigenous spokesperson and representative Isani Calapo, who is here with us from the Xingu Indigenous Park, Mato Grosso State, so that she may attend the UN Assembly, the UN General Assembly in New York in the US, and there voice and explain the reality experienced by the indigenous peoples in Brazil, and also bring to the fore the current situation of lies disseminated and propagated by the international and national media. They have insisted on turning Brazil's indigenous peoples into an endless market reserve, serving the interests of foreign countries that still view Brazil as a colony without rules or without sovereignty. 14% of Brazil's national territory are duly and regularly established as official indigenous lands. Many such communities are thirsty and eager and hope that the development of this portion of the country will finally take place without ideological chains, which will in turn enable achievement of a higher quality of life and standard of living in fields such as entrepreneurship, healthcare, and education. A new policy is needed for indigenous peoples in Brazil, and time is of the essence here. Bold measures can and should be encouraged in the pursuit of autonomy, economic empowerment of the indigenous peoples. Quite certainly, if a series of decisions are taken to that effect, we will be able to envisage a new approach to the Brazilian indigenous agenda. A new period of time, a new chapter of hope is needed currently for the indigenous communities. The situation of extreme poverty in which they find themselves, surviving on nothing but a family stipend and basic baskets of foodstuffs, has never delivered dignity or development. Radical extreme environmentalism and outdated approaches to the cause of indigenous people that are out of sync with what indigenous peoples truly want are tantamount to backwardness, marginalization, and absolute lack of citizenship. The reality described here requires that the world leaders attending the UN General Assembly learn and become familiar with our wishes and aspirations through the voice of indigenous spokesperson Isani Calapo, who will convey to you all the real situation regarding the Brazilian indigenous communities and the environment. Spokesperson Isani Calapo therefore enjoys the trust and prestige of the indigenous leaders that are interested in further development, empowerment, in a higher profile role and voice, and is thus fully in a position to represent the 52 ethnic groups listed in the attachment hereto. The monopoly of Tribal Chief Raoni is over. The United Nations organization performed a key role in overcoming colonialism in the past and cannot possibly accept that this type of mindset be allowed to come back to its rooms and halls, no matter under what pretext. We cannot forget that the world needs to be fed. France and Germany, for example, use up more than 50% of their territories for agriculture. By contrast, Brazil uses no more than 8% of its lands for food production. 61% of our territory are preserved. Ours is a zero-tolerance policy towards crime, including environmental crimes. I wish to again affirm my stance in this regard. Any initiative to help or support preservation of the Amazon forest or other biomes must be treated in full respect for Brazilian sovereignty. We also reject the attempts to exploit and use the environmental agenda or the indigenous policy agenda as tools to further political, economic interests of foreign countries, especially those that are disguised as good intentions. We stand ready to work together in partnerships and by adding value to our resources so as to sustainably develop all of our potentialities. Brazil hereby reaffirms her uncompromising, unmistakable commitment to the highest standards of human rights, to advocating democracy and freedom, to include freedom of expression, religious freedom, and freedom of the press. A commitment that goes hand in hand with our efforts to fight corruption and crime, which our society urgently calls for. We will continue to contribute, both within and outside of the United Nations framework, to build a world where there is no impunity, there is no hideout or shelter to criminals and corrupt people. Under my administration, Italian terrorist Cesare Battisti fled Brazil, was later arrested in Bolivia, and then extradited to Italy. 3 other terrorists from Paraguay and 1 from Chile, who used to live in Brazil up until recently as political refugees, have also been returned to their countries of origin. Terrorists operating under the guise of politically persecuted individuals will no longer find refuge in Brazil. Not too long ago, socialist presidents who preceded me in Brazil embezzled and misused hundreds of billions of dollars to buy a part of the media and of the Brazilian parliament, all in the name of an absolute power agenda. They have been tried and punished thanks to the sense of patriotism, perseverance, and courage of a judge who has become a symbol of my country. I'm talking about Dr. Sergio Moro, our incumbent Minister of Justice and Public Safety. Those presidents who came before me also transferred a sizable amount of these funds to third-party countries with the purpose of fostering and putting in place similar power projects throughout the region. Now, that source of funds has now dried out. Those same top-ranking government officials used or would come here to the UN year after year and make disengaged speeches about topics that never, ever served Brazil's real interests, nor did they ever contribute to foster greater world stability. Still, they were all applauded. In my country, we had no choice but do something about the virtually 70,000 murders and countless violent crimes that used to massacre the Brazilian population every year. Life, after all, is the most basic of human rights. Our military police officers were the preferred target of crime up until recently. In 2017 alone, about 400 military police officers were cruelly murdered. However, that is changing now. Measures have been taken, and we have succeeded in lowering by more than 20% the number of murders in the first 6 months of my administration. Drug seizures, including cocaine and other drugs, have reached record levels so far. Today, Brazil is a safer country and an even more hospitable country. We have just extended visa waiver to countries such as the United States, Japan, Australia, and Canada. And we're currently considering adopting similar measures to China and India, among other countries. With more safety and with these easier, streamlined procedures, we want to ensure that everyone can visit and get to know Brazil, especially the Brazilian Amazonian region, in all of its vastness and natural beauty. The Amazon is not being devastated, nor is it being consumed by fire, as the media misleadingly says. Each of you, ladies and gentlemen, can bear witness to what I'm saying now, and you can do so on a first-hand basis. Make sure you do visit Brazil and get to know Brazil. It is a very different country vis-à-vis the country that has been portrayed in many newspapers and television channels. Religious persecution is a scourge we should all tirelessly fight. In the past few years, we have witnessed in different regions of the world cowardly attacks that have victimized followers and faithful gathering in churches, synagogues, and mosques. Brazil strongly condemns all of these acts and remains ready to collaborate together with other countries to protect those who are oppressed because of their faith. the Brazilian people is particularly concerned about the increasing persecution, discrimination, and violence against missionaries and religious minorities, as has been seen in different geographies of the world. We therefore support establishing the International Day in memory of victims of acts of violence as a result of creed, religion, and related values. On that date, we will yearly celebrate those who suffer the harmful consequences of religious persecution. It is not acceptable at all that in the 21st century, with so many tools, instruments, treaties, organizations aimed at ultimately enshrining all types of rights, it is not acceptable that today we see millions of Christians and people of other religions who have ultimately lost their lives or freedom because of their faith. Evidence of Brazil's devotion to the peace cause is found in the solid history of Brazil's contributions to United Nations missions. For 70 years now, Brazil has given actual effective contributions to the United Nations peacekeeping operations. And we support all ongoing efforts to ensure that these missions become more effective and ultimately bring about real, concrete benefits to the countries receiving them. Under extremely diverse situations in countries such as Haiti, the Lebanon, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Brazilian troops have been recognized for the high quality of their work and for their respect towards the population, respect for human rights, and the guiding principles in peacekeeping operations. May I again reaffirm our willingness to uphold our concrete contributions to the United Nations missions, including in areas such as skills development and professional training of troops, an area in which Brazil is widely recognized for her experience. In the course of this year, 2019, we have established a broad-ranging international agenda with a view to restoring Brazil's role in the world scene and resuming relations with important partners. Last January, we were in Davos for the World Economic Forum, where we presented our ambitious reforms program to the investors community from all over the world. In March, we visited Washington, D.C., where we launched a comprehensive and bold partnership with the U.S. government, the government of the United States in all areas, with an emphasis on political coordination and economic and military cooperation. Political coordination and economic and military cooperation. Still, in the month of March, we went to Chile, where the Pro-South initiative was launched, an important step to ensure South America will consolidate itself as a region of democracy and freedom. After that, we visited Israel, where we identified countless opportunities for cooperation, particularly in the field of technology and security. I thank Israel for the support received to fight recent disasters in my country. We also visited one of our major partners in the South American Southern Cone, Argentina. Together with Argentine President Mauricio Macri and our partners from Uruguay and Paraguay, we have done away with ideology in the Mercosur bloc of countries, and we have achieved important trade gains by successfully completing negotiations that had been dragging on for decades. Before the end of the year, we will be visiting important Asian partners, not only in the Far East, but also in the Middle East. These visits will further strengthen the friendship ties and deepen our relations with Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. We do intend to follow the same pathway and approach towards all of the Arab world and Asia. We are also keenly looking forward to visiting our partners in Africa, partners and friends in Africa, Oceania, and Europe. As you can see, Brazil is a country that is open to the world and seeking partnerships with all of those who are interested in working for prosperity, for peace, and for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, the Brazil I represent here is a country that is lifting itself up again, reinvigorating partnerships and regaining its political and economic confidence. We are ready and poised to take on the responsibilities that are incumbent upon us in the international system. Over the past few decades, without realizing, we allowed ourselves to be seduced by ideological thought systems that did not seek truth, but rather absolute power. Ideology made its way into and has set in fields such as education, media, culture, and has become a dominant force in means of communication, universities, and schools. Ideology has invaded our homes and has engaged in an offensive against the mother cell, the seminal cell in any healthy society, i.e., the family itself. They even try to destroy the innocence of our children by going as far as perverting their most basic and elementary identity, i.e., biology itself. The politically correct has become a prevalent constant in public debate to expel rationality and replace it with manipulation, repeated commonplaces, and buzzwords. Ideology has invaded the human soul itself to expel God from it and the dignity with which He has endowed us. And with these methods, this ideology has always left behind it a trail of death, ignorance, and stark poverty wherever it passed through. I am myself living evidence of that. I was cowardly stabbed by a left-wing activist, and I only survived because of a miracle operated by God. Once again, I thank God for my life. The United Nations organization can help overcome the current materialistic and ideological atmosphere that undermines some basic principles of human dignity. This organization was, after all, designed and established to promote peace among sovereign nations and social progress with liberty in accordance with the preamble of the United Nations Charter. On matters such as climate, democracy, human rights, equality of rights and duties between men and women, and on so many other issues, all we need is precisely this: envisage and aim at the truth in line with the Gospel of John 8:32, which reads as follows: "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." All of our national and international instruments should be ultimately geared towards achieving that objective. We are not here to erase nationalities and sovereignties in the name of an abstract global interest. This is not the Global Interest Organization. This is the United Nations Organization, and it must remain as such. With a sense of humbleness and trust in the liberating power of truth, you can be sure that you will certainly be able to count on this new Brazil that I am presenting to you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you all for the grace and the glory of God. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federative Republic of Brazil for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and world leaders, 7 decades of history have passed through this hall in all of their richness and drama. Where I stand, the world has heard from presidents and premiers at the height of the Cold War. We have seen the foundation of nations. We have seen the ringleaders of revolution. We have beheld saints who inspired us with hope, rebels who stirred us with passion, and heroes who emboldened us with courage, all here to share plans, proposals, visions, and ideas on the world's biggest stage. Like those who met us before, our time is one of great contests, high stakes, and clear choices. The essential divide that runs all around the world and throughout history is once again thrown into stark relief. It is the divide between those whose thirst for control deludes them into thinking they are destined to rule over others, and those people and nations who want only to rule themselves. I have the immense privilege of addressing you today as the elected leader of a nation that prizes liberty, independence, and self-government above all. The United States, after having spent over $2.5 trillion since my election to completely rebuild our great military, is also by far the world's most powerful nation. Hopefully, it will never have to use this power. Americans know that in a world where others seek conquest and domination, our nation must be strong in wealth, in might, and in spirit. That is why the United States vigorously defends the traditions and customs that have made us who we are. Like my beloved country, each nation represented in this hall has a cherished history, culture, and heritage that is worth defending and celebrating, and which gives us our singular potential and strength. The free world must embrace its national foundations. It must not attempt to erase them or replace them. Looking around and all over this large, magnificent planet, the truth is plain to see. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique. It is why we in the United States have embarked on an exciting program of national renewal. In everything we do, we are focused on empowering the dreams and aspirations of our citizens. Thanks to our pro-growth economic policies, our domestic unemployment rate reached its lowest level in over half a century. Fueled by massive tax cuts and regulations cuts, jobs are being produced at a historic rate. 6 million Americans have been added to the employment rolls in under 3 years. Last month, African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American unemployment reached their lowest rates ever recorded. We are marshaling our nation's vast energy abundance, and the United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. Wages are rising, incomes are soaring, and 2.5 million Americans have been lifted out of poverty in less than 3 years. As we rebuild the unrivaled might of the American military, we are also revitalizing our alliances by making it very clear that all of our partners are expected to pay their fair share of the tremendous defense burden which the United States has borne in the past. At the center of our vision for national renewal is an ambitious campaign to reform international trade. For decades, the international trading system has been easily exploited by nations acting in very bad faith. As jobs were outsourced, a small handful grew wealthy at the expense of the middle class. In America, the result was 4.2 million lost manufacturing jobs and $15 trillion in trade deficits over the last quarter century. The United States is now taking that decisive action to end this grave economic injustice. Our goal is simple. We want balanced trade that is both fair and reciprocal. We have worked closely with our partners in Mexico and Canada to replace NAFTA with the brand new and hopefully bipartisan U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Tomorrow, I will join Prime Minister Abe of Japan to continue our progress in finalizing a terrific new trade deal. As the United Kingdom makes preparations to exit the European Union, I have made clear that we stand ready to complete an exceptional new trade agreement with the UK that will bring tremendous benefits to both of our countries. We are working closely with Prime Minister Boris Johnson on a magnificent new trade deal. The most important difference in America's new approach on trade concerns our relationship with China. In 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Our leaders then argued that this decision would compel China to liberalize its economy and strengthen protections to provide things that were unacceptable to us, and for private property, and for the rule of law. 2 decades later, this theory has been tested and proven completely wrong. Not only has China declined to adopt promised reforms, it has embraced an economic model dependent on massive market barriers, heavy state subsidies, currency manipulation, product dumping, forced technology transfers, and the theft of intellectual property, and also trade secrets on a grand scale. As just one example, I recently met the CEO of a terrific American company, Micron Technology, at the White House. Micron produces memory chips used in countless electronics. To advance the Chinese government's 5-year economic plan, a company owned by the Chinese state allegedly stole Micron's designs, valued at up to $8.7 billion. Soon, the Chinese company obtains patents for nearly an identical product and Micron was banned from selling its own goods in China. But we are seeking justice. The United States lost 60,000 factories after China entered the WTO. This is happening to other countries all over the globe. The World Trade Organization needs drastic change. The second largest economy in the world should not be permitted to declare itself a developing country in order to game the system at others' expense. For years, these abuses were tolerated, ignored, or even encouraged. Globalism exerted a religious pull over past leaders, causing them to ignore their own national interests. But as far as America is concerned, those days are over. To confront these unfair practices, I placed massive tariffs on more than $500 billion worth of Chinese-made goods. Already, as a result of these tariffs, supply chains are relocating back to America and to other nations, and billions of dollars are being paid to our Treasury. The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people. As we endeavor to stabilize our relationship, we're also carefully monitoring the situation in Hong Kong. The world fully expects that the Chinese government will honor its binding treaty made with the British and registered with the United Nations, in which China commits to protect Hong Kong's freedom, legal system, and democratic ways of life. How China chooses to handle the situation will say a great deal about its role in the world in the future. We are all counting on President Xi as a great leader. The United States does not seek conflict with any other nation. We desire peace, cooperation, and mutual gain with all. But I will never fail to defend America's interests. One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. The regime's record of death and destruction is well known to us all. Not only is Iran the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, but Iran's leaders are fueling the tragic wars in both Syria and Yemen. At the same time, the regime is squandering the nation's wealth and future in a fanatical quest for nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. We must never allow this to happen. To stop Iran's path to nuclear weapons and missiles, I withdrew the United States from the terrible Iran nuclear deal, which has very little time remaining, did not allow inspection of important sites, and did not cover ballistic missiles. Following our withdrawal, we have implemented severe economic sanctions on the country. Hoping to free itself from sanctions, the regime has escalated its violent and unprovoked aggression. In response to Iran's recent attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities, we just imposed the highest level of sanctions on Iran's central bank and sovereign wealth fund. All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened. Iran's leaders will have turned a proud nation into just another cautionary tale of what happens when a ruling class abandons its people and embarks on a crusade for personal power and riches. For 40 years, the world has listened to Iran's rulers as they lash out at everyone else for the problems they alone have created. They conduct ritual chants of death to America and traffic in monstrous anti-Semitism. Last year, the country's supreme leader stated Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible, and it will happen. America will never tolerate such anti-Semitic hate. Fanatics have long used hatred of Israel to distract from their own failures. Thankfully, there is a growing recognition in the wider Middle East that the countries of the region share common interests in battling extremism and unleashing economic opportunity. That is why it is so important to have full, normalized relations between Israel and its neighbors. Only a relationship built on common interests, mutual respect, and religious tolerance can forge a better future. Iran's citizens deserve a government that cares about reducing poverty, ending corruption, and increasing jobs, not stealing their money to fund and massacre abroad and at home. After 4 decades of failure, it is time for Iran's leaders to step forward and to stop threatening other countries and focus on building up their own country. It is time for Iran's leaders to finally put the Iranian people first. America is ready to embrace friendship with all who genuinely seek peace and respect. Many of America's closest friends today were once our greatest foes. The United States has never believed in permanent enemies. We want partners, not adversaries. America knows that while anyone can make war, only the most courageous can choose peace. For this same reason, we have pursued bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. I have told Kim Jong-un what I truly believe, that like Iran, his country is full of tremendous untapped potential, but that to realize that promise, North Korea must denuclearize. Around the world, our message is clear. America's goal is lasting. America's goal is harmony. And America's goal is not to go with these endless wars, wars that never end. With that goal in mind, my administration is also pursuing the hope of a brighter future in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the Taliban has chosen to continue their savage attacks. We will continue to work with our coalition of Afghan partners to stamp out terrorism, and we will never stop working to make peace a reality. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are joining with our partners to ensure stability and opportunity all across the region. In that mission, one of our most critical challenges is illegal immigration, which undermines prosperity, rips apart societies, and empowers ruthless criminal cartels. Mass illegal migration is unfair, unsafe, and unsustainable for everyone involved. The sending countries and the depleted countries, and they become depleted very fast, but their youth is not taken care of, and human capital goes to waste. The receiving countries are overburdened with more migrants than they can responsibly accept, and the migrants themselves are exploited, assaulted, and abused by vicious coyotes. Nearly 1/3 of women who make the journey north to our border are sexually assaulted along the way. Yet here in the United States and around the world, there is a growing cottage industry of radical activists and non-governmental organizations that promote human smuggling. These groups encourage illegal migration and demand erasure of national borders. Today I have a message for those open border activists who cloak themselves in the rhetoric of social justice. Your policies are not just. Your policies are cruel and evil. You are empowering criminal organizations that prey on innocent men, women, and children. You put your own false sense of virtue before the lives, well-being, and countless innocent people. When you undermine border security, you are undermining human rights and human dignity. Many of the countries here today are coping with the challenges of uncontrolled migration. Each of you has the absolute right to protect your borders. And so, of course, does our country. Today, we must resolve to work together to end human smuggling, end human trafficking, and put these criminal networks out of business for good. To our country, I can tell you sincerely, we are working closely with our friends in the region, including Mexico, Canada, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Panama, to uphold the integrity of borders and ensure safety and prosperity for our people. I would like to thank President López Obrador of Mexico for the great cooperation we are receiving and for right now putting 27,000 troops on our southern border. Mexico is showing us great respect, and I respect them in return. The U.S., we have taken very unprecedented action to stop the flow of illegal immigration. To anyone conducting crossings of our border illegally, please hear these words. Do not pay the smugglers. Do not pay the coyotes. Do not put yourself in danger. Do not put your children in danger, because if you make it here, you will not be allowed in. You will be promptly returned home. You will not be released into our country. As long as I am President of the United States, we will enforce our laws and protect our borders. For all of the countries of the Western Hemisphere, our goal is to help people invest in the bright futures of their own nation. Our region is full of such incredible promise, dreams waiting to be built, and national destinies for all. And they are waiting also to be pursued. Throughout the hemisphere, there are millions of hardworking, patriotic young people eager to build, innovate, and achieve. But these nations cannot reach their potential if a generation of youth abandon their homes in search of a life elsewhere. We want every nation in our region to flourish and its people to thrive in freedom and peace. In that mission, we are also committed to supporting those people in the Western Hemisphere who live under brutal oppression, such as those in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. According to a recent report from the UN Human Rights Council, women in Venezuela stand in line for 10 hours a day waiting for food. Over 15,000 people have been detained as political prisoners. Modern-day death squads are carrying out thousands of extrajudicial killings. The dictator Maduro is a Cuban puppet protected by Cuban bodyguards, hiding from his own people, while Cuba plunders Venezuela's oil wealth to sustain its own corrupt communist rule. Since I last spoke in this hall, the United States and our partners have built a historic coalition of 55 countries that recognize the legitimate government of Venezuela. To the Venezuelans trapped in this nightmare, please know that all of America is united behind you. The United States has vast quantities of humanitarian aid ready and waiting to be delivered. We're watching the Venezuela situation very closely. We await the day when democracy will be restored, when Venezuela will be free, and when liberty will prevail throughout this hemisphere. One of the most serious challenges our countries face is the specter of socialism. It's the wrecker of nations and destroyer of societies. Events in Venezuela remind us all that socialism and communism are not about justice. They are not about equality. They are not about lifting up the poor. And they are certainly not about good of the nation. Socialism and communism are about one thing only: power for the ruling class. Today I repeat a message for the world that I have delivered at home. America will never be a socialist country. In the last century, socialism and communism killed 100 million people. Sadly, as we see in Venezuela, the death toll continues in this country. These totalitarian ideologies, combined with modern technology, have the power to excise new and disturbing forms of suppression and domination. For this reason, the United States is taking steps to better screen foreign technology and investments and to protect our data and our security. We urge every nation present to do the same. Freedom and democracy must be constantly guarded and protected, both abroad and from within. We must always be skeptical of those who want conformity and control. Even in free nations, we see alarming signs and new challenges to liberty. A small number of social media platforms are acquiring immense power over what we can see and over what we are allowed to say. A permanent political class is openly disdainful, dismissive and defiant of the will of the people. A faceless bureaucracy operates in secret and weakens democratic rule. Media and academic institutions push flat-out assaults on our histories, traditions, and values. In the United States, my administration has made clear to social media companies that we will uphold the right of free speech. A free society cannot allow social media giants to silence the voices of the people, and a free people must never, ever be enlisted in the cause of silencing, coercing, canceling, or blacklisting their own neighbors. As we defend American values, we affirm the right of all people to live in dignity. For this reason, my administration is working with other nations to stop criminalizing of homosexuality, and we stand in solidarity with LGBTQ people who live in countries that punish, jail, or execute individuals based upon sexual orientation. we are also championing the role of women in our societies. Nations that empower women are much wealthier, safer, and much more politically stable. It is therefore vital not only to a nation's prosperity, but also is vital to its national security to pursue women's economic development. Guided by these principles, my administration launched the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiatives. The WGDP is the first ever government-wide approach to women's economic empowerment, working to ensure that women all over the planet have the legal right to own and inherit property, work in the same industries as men, travel freely, and access credit and institutions. Yesterday, I was also pleased to host leaders for a discussion about an ironclad American commitment protecting religious leaders and also protecting religious freedom. This fundamental right is under growing threat around the world. Hard to believe, but 80% of the world's population lives in countries where religious liberty is in significant danger or even completely outlawed. Americans will never fire or tire in our effort to defend and promote freedom of worship and religion. We want and support religious liberty for all. Americans will also never tire of defending innocent life. We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God. There is no circumstance under which the United States will allow international entries to trample on the rights of our citizens, including the right to self-defense. That is why this year I announced that we will never ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty, which would threaten the liberties of law-abiding American citizens. The United States will always uphold our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. We will always uphold our Second Amendment. The core rights and values America defends today were inscribed in America's founding documents. Our nation's founders understood that there will always be those who believe they are entitled to wield power and control over others. Tyranny advances under many names and many theories, but it always comes down to the desire for domination. It protects not the interests of many, but the privilege of few. Our founders gave us a system designed to restrain this dangerous impulse. They chose to entrust American power to those most invested in the fate of our nation, a proud and fiercely independent people. The true good of a nation can only be pursued by those who love it, by citizens who are rooted in its history, who are nourished by its culture, committed to its values, attached to its people, and who know that its future is theirs to build or theirs to lose. Patriots see a nation and its destiny in ways no one else can. Liberty is only preserved, sovereignty is only secured, democracy is only sustained, greatness is only realized by the will and devotion of patriots. In their spirit is found the strength to resist oppression, the inspiration to forge legacy, the goodwill to seek friendship, and the bravery to reach for peace. Love of our nations makes the world better for all nations. So to all the leaders here today, join us in the most fulfilling mission a person could have, the most profound contribution anyone can make. Lift up your nations, cherish your culture, honor your histories, treasure your citizens, make your country strong and prosperous and righteous, honor the dignity of your people, and nothing will be outside of your reach. When our nations are greater, the future will be brighter, our people will be happier, and our partnerships will be stronger. With God's help, together we will cast off the enemies of liberty and overcome the oppressors of dignity. We will set new standards of living and reach new heights of human achievement. We will rediscover old truths, unravel old mysteries, and make thrilling new breakthroughs. And we will find more beautiful friendship and more harmony among nations than ever before. My fellow leaders, the path to peace and progress and freedom and justice and a better world for all humanity begins at home. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world. And God bless America. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the United States of America for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the President, after which the meeting will stand suspended for 5 minutes before resuming to hear the next speaker. Should we start?
I feel it's always a disrespect.
Yeah, to leave, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the session is resumed, please. The Assembly. Is President Sisi here? Okay. Okay. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Abdel Fattah El Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. May I request protocol to export His Excellency On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Abdel Fattah El Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. And to invite him to address the Assembly.
I thank you, Mr. President. In the name of God, Mr. President, at the outset, it gives me great pleasure to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the General Assembly at its 74th session. I would like to seize this opportunity to express my heartfelt appreciation to Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, the President of the previous session. Ladies and gentlemen, our gathering this year comes at a time when the magnitude of all the challenges facing our world is increasing. It is thus imperative that we all engage in an in-depth discussion on the prospects for advancing our work under the umbrella of the United Nations, while upholding the noble values upon which our organization was founded. This can be achieved through reaffirming our commitment to an effective and just international order that is based on dialogue, cooperation, mutual respect, and the promotion of a culture of peace. Egypt, as a founding member of the United Nations and of a number of regional organizations, including the African Union, which we are honored to chair this year. We are also a founding member of the League of Arab States, and we have always possessed our own unique vision and contribution towards addressing the most important and daunting challenges of our time. Allow me here, from this August forum, to present Egypt's perspectives in this regard. Mr. President, respecting the principle of national ownership of solutions to national problems is imperative to ensuring the effectiveness of the multilateral system. Egypt has a pioneering experience in this regard. In recent years, it has embarked on an ambitious plan to comprehensively advance its society. This includes decisively combating terrorism and launching the most ambitious economic reform program in its modern history. This has been conducted in accordance with national plans and priorities, and have wholeheartedly been embraced by the Egyptian people, who have graciously shouldered the burden of its successful implementation in a manner that exceeded all expectations. Regionally, and as the current chair of the African Union, and alongside our African brothers and sisters, we have worked on consolidating the principle of African solutions to African problems. This aims to formulate a comprehensive approach which lays the foundations for development through a continent-wide vision that is based on our common history, unity of destiny, and confidence in our ability to achieve progress towards integration and upholding the interests of our peoples. To this end, a new mechanism has been launched in Cairo, which will focus on post-conflict reconstruction, namely the African Union Center for Reconstruction and Development. Undoubtedly, you are all well aware of the many recent successes of implementing the principle of national ownership, supported by an active African role, which resulted in the realization of a peace agreement in Central Africa, as well as the formulation of a common vision among the various parties in Sudan to manage the transition phase in that country. And here I would like to support deleting Sudan's name from the states that sponsor terrorism in order to acknowledge the efforts of the sisterly state and to enable it to confront the economic challenges it faces by enabling it to interact with international economic organizations in order to fulfill the ambitions of its people so that it would return to the place it deserves among the international family. And based on the principle of national ownership, African countries are fully cognizant of the importance of formulating genuine and effective partnerships in order to address the political and economic challenges they face, and in order to gain access to knowledge and technology and develop African human resources, as well as mobilize the necessary financing and political support. These are all essential to achieving the African Union's Development Agenda 2063. I therefore call upon international, continental, and regional financing institutions to assume their role in financing development in Africa under the most favorable terms. Africa is a continent of promising opportunities. It is a continent that can become the new engine of growth for the entire global economy, especially after launching the Continental Free Trade Area and after strengthening regional integration arrangements and developing an ambitious strategy for infrastructure. I would like to refer in this regard to the recent initiative launched by Egypt to convene the first edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development in December this year, in the city of Aswan, where it will be a platform for dialogue between international and regional actors, including political leaders, financing institutions, the civil society, and the private sector, all to implement international and regional initiatives and mechanisms targeting Africa. Mr. President, the resolution of protracted crises and inherited ones is a necessary precondition for any serious efforts aimed at formulating a more effective international system. The most prominent example of this is the longest-standing crisis in the Middle East, namely the Palestinian cause. The persistence of this cause without a just solution based on international resolutions calling for the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital does not only mean the continuation of the plight of the Palestinian people, but it also entails the continued depletion of the resources of the peoples of the Middle East. And I reiterate with a clear conscience what I've stated from this podium over the past few years. I say that Arabs are open to the realization of a just and comprehensive peace. The Arab Peace Initiative is still on the table, and there remains an opportunity to launch a new phase in the Middle East. However, we need bold decisions that restore the rights to the Palestinians, that pave the way for a major change in the reality of this region. And I say this without exaggeration, in the entire world. These decisions would lead to the establishment of a security and economic system in the Middle East that is based on peace, security, cooperation, and common interest. Mr. President, the adoption of comprehensive solutions to address the root causes of international problems is imperative for the success of the multilateral system. This applies to the protracted crisis in Libya, whose people suffer daily from the scourge of armed conflict. This conflict needs to be stopped. It is time to take a bold and decisive stand to address the root causes of the Libyan crisis comprehensively. This can be achieved by fully committing to implementing the United Nations plan adopted by the Security Council in October 2017. It can be achieved by addressing the grave imbalance in the distribution of wealth and power and the absence of public oversight via the Libyan people's elected representatives over political and economic decision-making. We also need to work on unifying all national institutions in order to save our dear neighbor from the ensuing chaos by militias and prevent the intervention of external actors in Libya's internal affairs. Similar to the imperative for a comprehensive solution in the Libyan crisis, a political solution for the crisis in Syria has also become an urgent need. We can no longer afford to waste more time and continue in this vicious cycle which Syria has been enduring for over 8 years. Egypt, while welcoming the announcement of the formation of the Constitutional Committee, nevertheless calls for the immediate commencement of its work without any delay as a fundamental step towards the realization of a comprehensive political settlement in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2254. This should be done in a manner that safeguards the unity and territorial integrity of Syria and its institutions. It eliminates terrorism and must put an end to the bloodshed. And in the same logic, I say that the time has come to take a decisive stand to end the protracted crisis in Yemen through the implementation of a political solution based on the well-known parameters. We need to end foreign interventions by non-Arab regional parties which seek to curtail Arab national security. We also need to address the unprecedented threats facing the Arabian Gulf region, including threats facing navigation, as well as recent attacks on oil installations in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mr. President, the principle of addressing matters comprehensively also applies to one of the most daunting challenges of our time, namely terrorism. Egypt has persistently called for a comprehensive approach in combating terrorism based on the necessity of confronting all terrorist organizations with no exception. Here I stress the need for all to fully comply with the relevant Security Council resolutions and to hold accountable those who support terrorism, whether through funding or weapons or through safe havens or media platforms, in addition to those involved in facilitating the movement and travel of terrorists. And from this podium, I reiterate Egypt's readiness in light of its extensive experience in counterterrorism, its readiness to intensify its cooperation with friendly countries and the United Nations, especially with regards to countering the ideology of terrorism. Here I stress the importance of implementing Security Council Resolution 2354 on the implementation of the comprehensive international framework to counter terrorist narratives. This resolution was adopted on the basis of an Egyptian initiative to uphold the values of tolerance and the renewal of the religious discourse. And speaking of the Security Council, we must work seriously and resolutely to address the imbalance in the composition and the shortcomings in the decision-making process in the Council. We must guarantee a balanced representation in the Security Council. And with regard to our African continent, we must work to rectify the historical injustice our continent has been subject to. I reiterate our commitment to the common African position based on the Isolini Consensus and the Third Declaration, and I call upon you to adopt this just position within the framework of the relevant intergovernmental negotiations. Mr. President, for decades, Egypt has sought to strengthen and deepen the bonds of cooperation with its brotherly Nile Basin countries, with whom it enjoys eternal relations. As a testament to its keenness to further the well-being of the peoples of the Nile Basin, Egypt expressed its understanding regarding Ethiopia's commencement to construct the Renaissance Dam, despite the fact that the latter did not conduct the necessary studies on the effects of this huge project to ensure that no harm befalls the water interests of downstream countries, including Egypt. Notwithstanding, Egypt took the initiative to bring forth the agreement on the Declaration of Principles signed on the 23rd of March 2015 in Khartoum, and this launched a 4-year-long negotiations process to reach an agreement governing the process of filling and operating the Renaissance Dam. Unfortunately, these negotiations have not yielded the desired results. Nevertheless, Egypt still hopes for an agreement that will secure the common interests of the peoples of the Blue Nile in Ethiopia, the Sudan, and Egypt. The continued impasse in the negotiations on the dam will have negative repercussions on the stability as well as on development in the region in general and in Egypt in particular. While we recognize Ethiopia's right to development, for Egypt, the water of the Nile is a matter of life. It is an existential matter, and this places a great responsibility on the international community to play a constructive role in urging all parties to demonstrate flexibility in order to achieve a mutually satisfactory agreement. In closing, Mr. President, Egypt's message today comes in the form of a call for the pursuit of peace. a call for action for the benefit of humanity, a call for cooperation and mutual understanding, a call for sustainable development and the promotion and protection of human rights, and a call for the realization that this is the ideal path for the benefit of the international community. May God aid us all for the good of our peoples. Peace and God's mercy and blessings be upon you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency President El Sisi of the Arab Republic of Egypt for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state.